Welcome to the September edition of the monthly market report for Keeping Current Matters. I'm David. I'll be with you to do this for the next 20 or so minutes. We're going to talk about things going on in the economy, recovery, talk about some things that are questions that people have, and we're also going to talk about some of the great things happening in the market like affordability. So look forward to spending the next few minutes with you. All right, so let's get started here. I've got a slide up here to start with from showing time. Now, if you remember, this is traffic from across North America in showings, whether they be virtual or in person. And as we start from left to right here and we look at this, we see we started out the year, if you remember, January and February, a couple of the best months in our business. As we started this year, we dipped down during quarantine when people literally couldn't leave their homes, and this shows just the the demand in showings since then as compared to January. And you can see week over week we've been above where we were in January. So a lot of folks coming out there. I'm going to come back to this slide, so remember that relative to showings, but very positive signs as we see after the dip down and going through the summer that people are out there looking at houses across, in this case, North America. The next piece of information I want to pull in here as we start to craft this story of how the market is performing right now is purchase applications. Now, this is an interesting look. It's week over week as compared to year over year. We'll look at year over year in a minute, but this is week. How many were this week as compared to last week? And again, if we read from left to right, we see we started out the year. You see the beginning of March actually there in that first green bar, and then we see the 4 consecutive weeks of dip, and then a lot of pent-up demand after that of people coming out that couldn't get out during quarantine. And for the last 5 or 6 weeks, we've kind of leveled out into 1% above, 1% below into the market, suggesting that we're through some of the pent-up demand of the summer. Okay, so as we look at that, I think we can say, what, that pent-up demand was there and is starting to suggest that we got through that. Now, if we look at purchase applications again this year, year over year, what do we see right here? Again, going to the left, we see we started out the year strong. That's kind of the first part of March, and then we dipped down during the time when people couldn't get out of their homes. And then, since about the middle of May, saw year over year increase in purchase applications, more applications this year than last, week by week. And where do we stand right now? We are ahead year over year, as you see those bars. So we looked just a minute ago at week over week, and I said we've kind of normalized out there, and we have, but we're ahead year over year. Now, it's very good information, very good things to see for the health of the market, and real estate certainly being very strong. I want to take a look at this as well in year over year and week over week pended deals. Okay, so we'll start with week over week here, and this is the change in newly pended deals. And again, if we start left to right, and we see in March we were strong there, dipped down during quarantine, and then during the summer, folks coming out, able to go into contract on a home, again, suggesting that was a lot of pent-up demand, folks that couldn't get out before. And then for the last 5-6 weeks, we've been, kind of going between 1% up or 1% down, leveling out. Now, the interesting thing here is the note at the bottom of this slide says pending sales were up 16.5% year over year. So as we are normalizing out, as I would call it, we're ahead by 16%. If we look at this as a bar graph, you can see right here, week by week for the last several weeks, we're ahead. Most recently, in most of those weeks, ahead 15 or 16%. One week there at 13.8%, almost 14%. So interesting story here as we start to look at the market week over week, and then the look year over year, starting to average out into the market week over week, but we're ahead as compared to last year. So the interesting thing about that is I tell you that to give you an example and a place in time of where real estate stands, because if I were to draw an analogy to this is probably like our business being a sports car flying down the road at 90 miles an hour, and then you see a speed limit sign or a cop ahead, and you got to jam on the brakes and slow down to 60, and you feel like you're going a lot slower, or you've slowed down. Well, you're actually still doing the speed limit, or going really fast, even though you've slowed down. So I think we're ahead year over year, but probably through a lot of the of the pent-up demand over the summer. So interesting to look at that as you go into the fall here in September and look at what's happening across the country, in particular in your market. Now, I told you about the first slide in showing time. We've seen a lot of positive growth since quarantine on showings. We started out the year very well, but we've seen that continue on, people, whether virtually or in person. I want to bring here a bar graph and read this to you because it's amazing. Home buyer traffic jumped again in July, recording a 60.7% year-over-year increase. Let me back up and say that again, 60.7 year-over-year increase in nationwide showing activity, according to the data from Showing Time. Now, you can look across and see each region of the country, Northeast leading the way, but each area of the country showing significant jump over the previous year in showing. So suggested to say there's a lot of demand right now. We've talked a lot about how home has become important now, how things are more important to people. Different things right now are important, whether it be the needs you have in a home, the location you have in a home, other things like that. And we're seeing significant demand. Now, as we think about that, the challenge across the country is inventory. And according to Daniel Hale and Realtor.com, most recently, year-over-year total inventory was down 38%. And buyers continue to be motivated by low mortgage rate and the strong desire for certainty of ownership in an uncertain world. And they're quickly putting offers on homes that come up for sale, driving the overall number of homes for sale lower. So we know we've got a lot of demand there. We know we are limited in the number of homes for sale, the supply of homes, and you know this is an economic situation here. If we start to look at prices, is this price scenario right now across the country is driven by high demand and low supply, keeping upward pressure on prices. Now, I want to give you a look at what experts are forecasting for pricing going forward in the next 12 months. And you can see the overwhelming majority, 8 of the 9 surveyed here, are saying positive price appreciation as we look forward. Some are projecting for this current year, some over the next 12 months. But as you look at that, you see anywhere from the range of 3 to 4%. A couple of outliers there. Hawes still saying -1%, but overwhelmingly people saying we're going to see appreciation going into the remainder of this year into next year, again governed and dictated by supply and by demand, the lack of supply and the overwhelming demand. But what's the story here? The story, I would argue, is the major adjustments on the future of home prices. Fannie Mae went from saying we're going to see appreciation of about 0.4% to 4.4%. Zillow flipped from depreciation to appreciation. And CoreLogic, probably the biggest jump there, from -6.6 depreciation to 0.6 appreciation. And I would think they would probably, as we go forward, go higher there. Now, as we go into the next year, I think this is an area in the local markets that we serve. We can look at, okay, what is demand? What's happening with demand, pinned to deals? What's happening with supply? And know that white hot interest rates are driving people to say, now is the time that we need to buy a home. And it's certainly being seen and felt across the country. Now, I'll bring in a quote here from Frank Martell from CoreLogic. He says, on an aggregate level, the housing economy remains rock solid despite the shock and awe of the pandemic. So coming through all of this, housing remains very, very good, and certainly is one of the factors economically helping to lead the way coming out of all of the economic stress of the health crisis that we've faced as a nation. So good news here relative to the health of the housing market, where we stand with prices and appreciation going forward, all of that being fueled by people saying we need a home. There are different reasons we need one, and we're more motivated today to go out and buy, and all of that being fueled by low interest rates. Now, there are some questions in the market that I think we need to look at. One is the forbearance, and forbearance for the last 3 weeks has started to level off at 3.93 million. We've talked about this a lot in the past, and folks being able to extend forbearance if they still need it, some coming off, but we're going to continue to watch that. But right now, as we look at it from July on in through August, we know that we've dropped a little bit and now we're leveling off. And the future question is what's going to happen with those homes and those people that are coming out of forbearance. That's a big question right now. So Bankrate, Jeff Ostrowski, senior reporter, said this. I think is very important about what we see relative to the question about what about foreclosures or things coming out of that, out of forbearance. The COVID-19 pandemic will lead to a rise in mortgage defaults and foreclosures. I want to talk about that in a minute. But as the housing market muscles through this economic downturn, it looks as if foreclosures will form a trickle rather than a flood. So, is what housing experts say. He goes on. Now, we've talked about this. We've talked about the significant amount of equity that people have in their homes today, and that provides them options. We're seeing that, his words here are a trickle rather than a flood. So there will be defaults in this country, and certainly we don't want to see that, but that happens in our business, but nothing like what we saw in 2008, where there were very different scenarios relative to the amount of equity, the financial stress that people felt, and the need to, in some cases where they owed more than the home was worth, they just walked away, and we saw this flood of foreclosures. He's calling it a trickle here rather than a flood. But I want to go back to what he says. He says the COVID-19 pandemic will lead to a rise in foreclosures. Okay, let's address that, and let's say, why is that? And here's the simple answer for that. The percent of distressed property sales is at an all-time low right now. And this gives you kind of a look back to January 2012. And we know coming into the health crisis, we were certainly low in the number of distressed sales. And we're even lower now. Why? Because there is a moratorium on starting foreclosure proceedings, whether they're judicial, non-judicial proceedings. They literally can't start. And as people extend their forbearance, that will, that moratorium gets extended. As people come off, no doubt there will be people that move into foreclosure, and we're going to keep an eye on that and say, what is that? But what's that going to happen there? But going back to that quote we just read, they'll come on the market, but not a flood of activity because of the options that homeowners have today due to equity and strength of equity across the country. So the big story right now, I think, what we need to be talking about in the market is affordability. And this is a quote from a Black Knight study published by Mortgage News Daily. And it says those shopping for a home can afford 10% more than they could have 1 year ago while keeping their monthly payment unchanged. This translates into nearly $32,000 more in buying power. Now, this is very interesting because $32,000 in more buying power is unreal across the country. Now, if I was you, I would look at a couple of things. Back in November of 2018, almost 2 years ago, not quite 2 years ago, the average 30-year fixed was 4.94%. Let's call that 5%. Today, we sit just below 3%. I believe the most recent weekly release was 2.93%. Now, here's the question. 2 years ago at 5% in your average purchase price, what would that buy in the market? In those dollars, those same dollars, what would they buy today? What is the increase in purchasing power in the market that you serve? I'll say this, I'll guarantee it's significant, $32,000 on average across the country, but depending on where you live in the market that you serve, probably is going to depend on that, whether you're in a higher market, lower market, and in the clientele that you serve. But that's what we need to be talking about. We look at the Mortgage Credit Availability Index from NAR, and the way to look at this graph that I'm showing right here is the higher the index, the more affordable homes are. And if we look over the last 10 to 12 years, going back to around 2008, we see that the orange bars there in the middle are the time where distressed properties dominated a lot of the sales in the market, where we're just, folks that had fallen into some sort of distressed sale, and those homes were sold off. And where do we stand today? We stand really in an affordability measure somewhere around, that time during the housing crisis. So very, very good news relative to affordability, relative to people being able to get out there and afford more of a home, what they need in today's market. Now, the challenge, like we said, is them being able to find that home. Now, as we start to look into the fall and even into next year, I think the strength of the housing market is going to be the story that's out there. And this is a quote from Doug Duncan from Fannie Mae. You may have heard of him. We believe housing will continue to be a sector with relative strength amid the larger downturn. The recently observed increase in purchase demand is largely due to pent-up demand as buyers are acting now after delaying purchases in the spring. What we just saw earlier, we saw a lot of this pent-up demand work through. However, we are seeing some early signs of shifter buying preference to locate to lower density areas, potentially driving some initial purchase activity. So a lot of data to support right now, people are moving from dense areas to less dense areas, urban markets to suburban markets. They're looking for a backyard. They're looking for an office. They're looking for a place for their kids to do school in. There's just different needs today in a home, and that's certainly driving a lot of the demand that we're seeing. So as we head in the fall, we're up again as we looked at that year over year, starting to level out there, but strong demand driven by a lot of need in the market. And I think, this is a time right now where home has become more important to people in such a short amount of time than I've ever seen before. And the needs that people have increased dramatically. Now, interesting, as we start to look at 2021, our job right now is to get out there and help sellers list their home. We need to bring more inventory back to the market. That is the need right now. As we look at this is very, very interesting. Lawrence Yun from NAR, I want to talk about this year, then we'll talk about next. Yun forecasts, this first quote at the top, existing home sales to ramp up to 5.8 million, that's an annualized pace, in the second half. That expected rebound would bring the full year level of existing home sales to 5.4 million, a 1.1% gain compared to 2019. Who would have thought we'd be sitting here in September saying we have a chance to beat last year in the number of existing homes sold? And that's amazing. Looking at what we've come out of and what's happening, we know that economically things are improving. The September unemployment report coming out at 8.4% unemployed. I'm not suggesting that's a good number, but that number is coming down. If one family or one individual wants a job that doesn't have it, we want them to have that. But the economy is doing better relative to unemployment and consumers being able to spend again. And we're seeing the real estate market responding very, very well coming out of the health crisis to the degree we have a shot at being, beating last year's performance. The second piece, he goes on to say, home sales will ramp up again next year, increasing between 8 and 12% as we go into 2021. So really, really big, numbers there, I think, relative to going into next year and saying we're going to see more and more demand, more and more people looking to buy a home as we go into next year. And so I think that's the message as we, go into the end of this year, is that we need to bring more listings to market and finish this year well. Because we have a chance to beat, first of all, we have a chance to beat last year's numbers. Second, we need to be out in the market because there are a lot of agents that furloughed themselves over the summer and didn't do anything. The word is out; they're coming back, and they're going to be out in the market. So we need to be out there and be vocal and be visible. And whoever wins the fourth quarter will go into January very, very strong. This January we wrote a blog post that says the spring market is here. Are you ready? And what we've seen for the last 5 years is buyers being in the market earlier and earlier, not waiting to the spring, really after the turn of the year, being out in the market saying we want to buy a home. Certainly would expect that this year. So, lots of reasons. And then even, not to discount the market next year, we need to be in the market so we start off strong and are able to drive into 2021 in a big way. So a lot of good things happening out there. Market settling out above where it was last year. Questions about forbearance that we're going to stay on top of, but the story really is affordability and growth going into the fourth quarter and into 2021. Coming up, as always, I want to tell you about what we have going on. Buyer and seller guides are out. If you haven't checked those out, go check those out. Great place to educate people. A lot of the information in there is going to be what buyers want to read, what sellers want to read when they make the decision. Also, later this month, we have coming our 2020 Latino Community Guide, an agent's guide to working with the Latino community. So important stuff that you're going to want to check out as the weeks come ahead here in September. So thanks for devoting this time to the monthly market report. I always enjoy going over all of this information to give you the information you need to be the knowledge broker, because this is what we have to do in the market. So thanks for joining, and we'll see you again next month.